Hi, I'm Stuart from the Norfolk Honey Company and welcome to part 6 of getting started in beekeeping. So we've already had a look at what constitutes a hive, how the colony is made up, the different castes of the honeybee, and today we're going to take a look at the beekeeping year, or at least part of the beekeeping year. I'm going to split it up into 4 sections, so we'll take 4 3-month periods in each session. You'll gain an understanding of how the bee colony fluctuates through the year, how the activity within the hive increases and decreases throughout the year, and also the kind of jobs that you'll need to do as a beekeeper to make sure that your honeybees are kept healthy and productive right across the year. So if this is your first time of joining us, thanks very much for stopping by and taking a look at my videos. This is part 6. It would be worth just checking out some of the earlier sessions that we've done. What I'll do is I'll post a link above to the very first of the sessions, and you can pop back and take a look at that, or alternatively stay with us here, hit the subscribe button down in the bottom corner there, and then you can pop back and have a look at those earlier sessions at your leisure. We've also got a range of other videos that we're posting, so hopefully you'll find something of interest. So if you're only just getting started in beekeeping, you might only just have acquired your first colony, or you might be thinking of buying some bees perhaps next spring, and looking for ideas of how you can manage those bees and bring them through successfully for your first year in beekeeping. So this is designed specifically for the beginner who's just starting to think about their bees. So let's say that you're going to buy some bees and you're trying to decide when the best time of year would be to buy them. So my recommendation to you would be to wait until very late spring, early summer, and then buy yourself a nucleus of bees, which is a small colony. So a nucleus colony normally would consist of 5 or 6 frames of the type that would fit the beehive that you've purchased, and in that nucleus colony you would have frames made up of food stores, pollen stores, bees, brood in various stages, a queen who is laying well, and the queen might be marked. What I would say is don't be tempted to buy bees too early in the year, particularly here in the UK, and I'm sure in other temperate climates around the world. If you buy a nucleus colony in March or April, there's a chance that the weather could turn quite cold, quite chilly, and you might find the bees struggle in that first few precious weeks when you're just getting to know your bees and the bees are just starting to emerge from their long winter haul and trying to just get themselves sorted and starting to work more actively as the day lengthens and the temperatures increase. It's very tempting to buy bees in the late summer into the autumn, and if you get a nucleus of bees at that time of the year, you've then got to nurture them into the autumn and through the winter, and there's a very real chance that, being a beginner beekeeper, if you don't have everything laid out in front of you, you could find that the bees don't survive the winter, and then you've paid potentially a lot of money for a nucleus colony that isn't going to survive. So hold off until the spring, and certainly late spring, when it's a bit like planting out tender plants that you've been raising in a greenhouse. You really need to know that there's not going to be any frosts that are going to kill them. Honeybees are very similar. You want to make sure that the weather is warming up nicely for them, so that when you take ownership of those bees, you're not going to get a sudden cold snap and then worry about how you're going to help your bees through that weather. So let's start our beekeeping year at the point that you have purchased some bees. So let's say that we're in mid to late spring. So for spring we're going to take the 3-month period of March, April and May. And so the weather's warming up and you've taken ownership of your nucleus colony. You've had help getting them into your beehive, and now's the time that you need to be feeding those bees and building them up into a nice strong colony you've added extra frames of foundation, and the bee colony size is going to start growing fairly rapidly. So you need to now be inspecting on a weekly basis, and the colony size is going to increase quite rapidly. If we were looking at a full-size colony, you'd be talking in the range of 30 to 40,000 bees perhaps. Still only one queen in there, and you will now start to find that drone cells will be forming, and you really need to start inspecting on a weekly basis and making sure that you're prepared, ready for swarm control, because this is the time that the bees are going to start developing and producing queen cells and start swarming, particularly if it's quite a warm spring. So you need to be on your guard and looking at different methods of swarm prevention. And because swarming is such an important event for beekeepers, I'll be devoting an entire session on the swarming process and some of the practical steps that you can take to try to prevent swarming happening with your beehive. So again, looking at the beginner beekeeper who's purchased their nucleus colony, you need to have a feeder and be feeding your bees with sugar syrup. And I have produced a video earlier on the different types of feeders that are available, and I'll put a link into the video to show you where to go to take a look at that. And each week as you check them, you'll find that the bees will have produced more comb on the frames of foundation that you've placed in there. It's really important that you keep the feed going into the colony and you allow them all of the building blocks for producing lots of wax so that they can build their colony as fast as possible. The sooner you achieve a full brood box, the faster that the bees can then produce more brood and the colony size can increase, and you've then got a nice healthy colony. The other thing to say about feeding the sugar syrup is as the bees produce more comb in the brood box, it means that they can store food in the form of the sugar syrup that you're feeding them, the nectar that they're foraging, and the pollen that they're bringing back. And once you've got a good sized colony inside that brood box that's working all of the frames really well, you know that you've got enough food stores in there should the weather suddenly turn inclement, cold and rainy. The last thing you want is a nucleus colony in a brood box full of frames of foundation with no food that are going to suddenly suffer and potentially starve should the weather turn particularly cold. So spring is a really good time to have a look for disease. Because the colony hasn't reached its maximum size, you've got fewer bees in the colony, and therefore you can get into the hive a lot easier and check for the various brood diseases, particularly the two nasty ones, American foul brood and European foul brood. And if you're not familiar with those, then I would certainly recommend that you speak to a more experienced beekeeper, or if you're in the UK, speak to maybe your regional or seasonal bee inspector and get them to come along and have a look if you suspect any problems at all. But if you're a member of a local club, talk to a more experienced beekeeper and invite them along to have a cup of tea and a biscuit, and maybe just take half an hour to go through your bees and just point out some of the issues that maybe you've got in the colony. And in one of the later videos in this series, we'll have a closer look at the various diseases that you might encounter, and also, more importantly, taking a look at what a healthy brood pattern looks like, what healthy brood within a colony looks like. And once you gain an understanding of good bee health, the diseases, the infections tend to stand out a lot clearer once you understand what a healthy colony should look like. So look out for that in one of the future videos too. And something else that I would recommend is keeping accurate records of your beekeeping experiences. They don't have to be anything complicated. It could be simply a card that you place under the roof on top of the crown board, so that you're making notes each time that you inspect, just so that you have a record of what's going on in the colony, particularly if you have several beehives. Remembering exactly what's going on, particularly for me, is always an issue, so I keep fairly accurate notes I've migrated my records from cards into books. I now use an iPad with my records on, and I enter the records in each inspection, and I can go back to those the following week just to double check if there's something specific going on. I also sometimes write quick notes to myself on top of the roof of the hive using a queen marking pen, and I'll show you how I do that in another video. This week I'm going to produce another video in my Beekeeping Basics series showing you how to keep accurate beekeeping records, and I'll also show the records that I keep on my iPad just in case anybody else wants to have a bash at that particular method. So take a look at that at the weekend. It'll be uploaded on Sunday in the usual Beekeeping Basics session. So as spring progresses, one of the things to look for when you're opening your beehive is to make sure that the queen is laying plenty of eggs, and eggs can be somewhat difficult sometimes for beginners to spot, and the best way I can describe them is that they look like tiny grains of rice at the bottom of the cell. So you need to orientate the frame so that you have a good amount of light coming over your shoulder and going down into the bottom of the frame, and there at the bottom of the frame you'll see potentially a tiny little small white grain of rice, and that's the egg. Now the egg could be in one of several positions. When the queen first lays the egg, it's in an upright position, and then over the course of the next 3 days that egg will gradually fall down until it's flat and its position is flat on the bottom of the cell before it then becomes a larvae. So have a look for eggs particularly. It's good practice, and it's something that really you need to be able to spot. Now if you're wearing glasses, then do take your glasses to your inspections with you. If you need to use a magnifier, then use a magnifier. There's plenty of tools available for you to be able to spot eggs. You don't have to rush, you can take your time, because as we get into the later spring days, the weather is going to warm up, and inspecting bees can then be a pleasure. It doesn't have to be a struggle. One thing I would add is don't try to inspect your bees when the temperature is below around 15 degrees centigrade. I would call it t-shirt weather. If the weather's warm enough to be wearing just a t-shirt, then it's warm enough to inspect your bees. And as the temperature then increases up to the 20s, then you can really start to take your time and enjoy inspecting your bees. This is, after all, a hobby that you want to enjoy. It shouldn't be a challenge every time that you open up your beehive, and you shouldn't worry about the amount of time that you're taking to inspect your bees, and just have a good look through your hive, enjoy what you're looking at, and make a mental note of the things that you're seeing. See if you can identify the difference between a worker and a drone, particularly when you have worker cells and drone cells, and we'll show some images of the difference between the two. See if you can spot your queen. Is she marked? Then she should be quite easy to spot. If she isn't marked, then it might be something that you want to get some help with to mark the queen while the colony size is still quite small, so that it's easier to find her. And I always mark my queens. I think it's important. It allows me to identify if a colony has swarmed, and it also reminds me of how old the queen is. And it's just one of those techniques that you can master over a period of time, and when we get into the spring I'll put together a video of how to mark a queen. So if you're just starting in beekeeping, the location of your beehive and your apiary needs to be carefully thought through before you purchase your bees, or you obtain a swarm, or however you're going to get bees, because once you have the bees in your hive, it then becomes slightly more difficult to move them. You can only move them a small distance or a very large distance in any one time. The rule of thumb is no more than 3 feet or more than 3 miles. So if you're in a home apiary in your back garden and you've positioned a beehive maybe at the bottom of the garden, and you then decide that you'd like to move it close to the house, you can really only move that beehive in increments of maybe 2 or 3 feet at a time. If you've got bees at home and you decide, or you've been offered an out apiary, that's an apiary away from your home location, and it's maybe half a mile down the road, you might find that if you move the bees from your back garden to that new location, that the flying foraging bees that are already out flying around will locate their position and come back to your back garden. So you'll end up with a cluster of bees on the position where the hive used to be, but you've moved the hive to half a mile down the road. So it's important that you take those things into consideration when you're setting up the exact position of your beehive, either at home or at an out apiary. So by the end of spring you will have a growing colony. Plants will beginning to provide lots more nectar and pollen for your colony. The brood nest will be growing, your queen will be laying more and more eggs, the sun will be shining, and everything will be fantastic in your beekeeping garden. So next time we're going to have a look at the summer months, the time when the bees are going to be working flat out. You as a beekeeper are going to be inspecting on a regular basis and checking your bees on a weekly rotation, and learning more about your bees and learning how to become a better beekeeper. This video is going out in pretty much the middle of winter, and now is a great time to read up all about bees and beekeeping and trying to get some ideas as to how you're going to manage your bees in the spring. And I'll put some lists down in the description of some of the books that I've found really useful, and there'll be links to places that you can go to buy them. They're affiliate links, so the books won't cost you any more, but I do get a small commission from any that you purchase, so please do check those out. In the next session we'll look at summer. I hope you found that interesting. We're moving forward now into the mechanics of beekeeping and the more practical aspects of beekeeping, and I hope that you're finding these sessions really useful. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do hit the subscribe button. Any interaction that I can have with you is fantastic. It gets my videos higher up the search rankings, so I'd be really grateful if you could give me either a thumbs up or a thumbs down if that's what you think of the video, but also if you could leave some comments, and I do promise to answer all of the comments. And if you have any questions, please leave some questions for me as well, and we'll catch up in the next session of Getting Started in Beekeeping next week. Don't forget that on Fridays I've got my beekeeping microscopy videos, and those looking at pollen and bee dissection and bee diseases, and then on Sunday evenings I post my beekeeping basics videos, which are more day-to-day beekeeping videos, how-to videos, and just a look at some of the beekeeping that I've been doing, and hopefully you'll join me with some of those too. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll catch up next time.